Welcome back, everybody. As promised, here's another complete set presentation. This time I'm going to take you into the 80s, which I know is not maybe the most popular era of set collecting by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some good sets in the 80s, so I wanted to kind of capture some of those and feature some of those this year. I know they probably won't be as popular as the stuff I have from the 60s and 70s, but that's just perfectly fine. I do have a few more from the 60s and 70s to share with you this year. So I'm excited to kind of share with what you have right now, starting with 1981. So the 1981 season was the very first year where we have Donruss and Fleer also competing directly with Topps. Topps adopted the Real One logo and started putting it on their products as a way to kind of indicate that they're the original. So to kind of help direct consumers to be able to buy that product by doing so. The set is recognizable, and I'll kind of show you here in a minute what a card looks like. I'm going to start with the only graded card I have, which is the Tim Raines rookie card in here. And you'll see him featured again in the set. It's recognizable by the hat they have in the corner for each and every card. On the back, it is a predominantly red design and also has a little comics on the bottom of the cards too, just not on the multiple rookie cards. The set features 726 cards, which was the third straight year they did that. They also released a traded series and a box set for the first time that year, which so you could get some of your favorite rookies that were on dual rookie cards like the Rain, but you can get an individual card. Those cards do sell pretty well for their rookies and also considered rookies as well. All right, so the set itself has a couple Hall of Fame rookies in it, Raines being one. I'll show you the other in a minute. But it's also got two other big names from the 80s, including one who's about to have his number retired with the Los Angeles Dodgers. All right, let's jump into it. I'll talk a little bit about the 1981 baseball season. I was a very young kid when this happens. I don't really remember much of it, so I had to look up much of it myself. The set begins with league leader cards from 1980, and I'll point out the Hall of Famers and some of the stars like I do each and every time I do a set like this. George Brett was featured up there as a batting leader with Bill Buckner, who we've talked about previously on the channel before. Home run leaders has actually two Hall of Famers featured on the card. Reggie Jackson, who tied with the home run lead that year, and also Mike Schmidt. The runs batted in was Mike Schmidt and also Cecil Cooper. Stolen base leaders, obviously Ricky Henderson is the big name on that card. Victory leaders, we have Steve Carlton up here, and also we have a little Steve Stone here, which is a pretty famous guy here locally as a broadcaster. Currently with the White Sox, but spent a long time in the booth with Harry Carey and the Cubs. And Steve Carlton is a strikeout leader here. Earned run average leader, we have Hall of Famer Don Sutton listed on here. The leading fireman, we have Raleigh Fingers listed on here. It was a Hall of Famer. The 1981 season itself is really remembered mostly for two things. First being there was an actual player strike in the middle of the season, which stopped play for about a 7-week period from June until the end of July. As a result of it, they actually had to push back the All-Star game, which was originally canceled, but they moved it to the second week in August. Here it was actually August 9th, which was the kickoff to the second half of the season. So what they did for the playoffs, instead of just doing cumulative records for the course of the year in the divisions, they actually gave a first half champion and a second half champion. So they actually were adding additional playoff teams as a result of doing that. So they didn't just go based on best record. All right, first page there, there's no Hall of Famers. I'm there to point out second one. Not as well, but we definitely have some good players kind of listed on there as well, including good old Danny Darwin. I think he was actually part of the trade that brought John Smoltz from the Detroit Tigers to the Atlanta Braves. Jack Clark was a big name back in the day. Rick Honeycutt, probably known more as the pitching coach under Tony La Russa's great teams with the A's and also shortly with the Cardinals thereafter until he retired. Ed Farmer, a broadcaster with the White Sox for many, many, many years. It's a name known well locally. Davey Lopes, not a Hall of Famer, but definitely a big star in his era. George Brett's brother, Ken Brett. Also played locally with the White Sox for a little while as well. We got Willie Randolph, who was a big star for the Yankees during his era. I'm going to stop here just for a minute and talk a little bit about like the playoff teams. So one of the shortcomings of doing that format where they had a first half and a second half champion was in one of the leagues, the National League, the team that actually had the best record over the two halves didn't get in the playoffs because they didn't win either half, and that was the St. Louis Cardinals, which was kind of an interesting little bit of history. The teams that actually did advance were the Yankees, the Milwaukee Brewers, the Oakland A's, the Kansas City Royals in the American League. In the National League, you had the Philadelphia Phillies, the Montreal Expos, the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then the Houston Astros. So in the first round, you had the Dodgers sweeping the Astros. You had the Expos actually advancing to the NLCS by beating the Philadelphia Phillies, who were the defending champions at that time. The A's swept the Royals and moved into the American League Championship Series against the against the Royals, which I believe were the World Series American League representative from the previous year, and then the Yankees took out the Milwaukee Braves, who advanced to the ALCS. We've got Al Oliver down here. I know Mangini's kind of pointed out a few times as someone that probably deserves more consideration for the Hall of Fame, and I couldn't agree more. Great hitter during his time. Here's another great hitter too. Probably doesn't meet the criteria, but definitely was a star of his day, Reggie Smith. Here's Mario Mendoza. The joke about the Mendoza line batting under 200. There he is, Mendoza. We have Rusty Staub down here, a star, not a Hall of Famer. One of my favorite names in baseball, Bake McBride. Here we go. We got our, I think, Hall of Famer standing out here, Rod Carew, right here at the top. I don't think that was his first year with the Angels. I think it may have been his second year in California. Definitely was continuing to be a great hitter during that time, and actually was a part of some very good Angels teams in the early to mid 80s that never really got further than a playoff appearance. But here he is, pictured in a Angels uniform right now. He retired the year I started collecting, so 1986 Topps was his final card, but he was already retired. Here we got Yastrzemski, one of the stars from the early parts of the 60s, who's still playing by the time this set was released. Yastrzemski, this was his third to last Topps card, even though there's cards for 84 Fleer and Donruss that feature him as well. All right, so now we have our League Championship Series. The Yankees took care of business real quick, swept the Oakland Athletics in a 5-game series and won all first 3 games, and they advanced to the World Series, whereas the Dodgers had to go all the way to a 5th game and beat the Montreal Expos, which actually ended up being the closest the Expos ever got to the World Series. They had some great players on that team. They had Dawson, Carter, and Raines, just to name the Hall of Famers that were part of that team. And in the World Series itself, here's Dawson. Actually, we just talked about the Hawk, and there he is, pictured with the Expos. I love his old Expos cards with those uniforms. Didn't like the uniforms at the time, but now that the Expos have been gone for such a long period of time, I do look back fondly on the Expos uniforms of that era. In the World Series itself, the Los Angeles Dodgers won 4-2 for their 5th World Series championship over the New York Yankees. Now, the second thing that the season's really known for, beyond the strike, and probably the things people kind of maybe remember the most fondly about that era, was Fernando Mania down in Los Angeles. Fernando Valenzuela, we'll get to his rookie card at some point here too, debuted. Mexican-born pitcher who pitched for the Dodgers and just kind of really helped shape the culture down there for LA Dodger fans, as opposed to just the relocated Dodger fans who may have followed the team from New York back in the heyday, even though they had some great teams in the 60s and 70s as well, but it kind of rebranded it completely in the 80s and made it very popular with those who were from Latin America and Mexico and things like that, because they felt they had representation at the major league level with a big time star. In fact, Fernando actually was the Rookie of the Year that year, as well as the Cy Young Award winner for the National League. So what a debut for that player that time. He was not the MVP though, and we'll kind of mention that as we kind of get through some of these players. There's Mark Fidrich, kind of nearing the end of his career, kind of blew out his arm. So we're getting near the end of his playing days. Fergie Jenkins with the Rangers at this time. Shortly before he came to the Cubs, I think the next year he actually is with the Cubs. Love some of these old uniforms too here. The White Sox one I don't love so much, but I do look back fondly when I see the cards. If they still wore those uniforms to this day, I would just despise them. But at the time, they're kind of funny to look back at the era and kind of seeing that happen. So we still got some airbrushing going on by 1981. Until it's an airbrushed helmet on here on this Gary Woods card. Here we got Pete Rose down in the corner. Obviously not a Hall of Famer, but the all-time hits leader here with the Phillies. I think that might be his first Philly card, if I'm not mistaken. Not sure if his 1980s cards with the Reds or with the Phillies. Bob Grich, someone that maybe needs to be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame if you ever look up his numbers. Just kind of look it up and see where he looks at with WAR. So this is a guy that was probably identified better after the advent of WAR, but not during his time. Maybe wasn't recognized as the player that he was amongst his peers. Mad Hungarian, still pitching at this point. We got George Foster card up here, still Cincinnati. So now we have like the record breaker cards, guys who set records during that course of that season, whether they be single season records or career records at that point. Bench set their career record at that point for home runs by a catcher, has since been passed. Most strikeouts by a left-hander has also since been passed by Randy Johnson. And we have like most stolen bases by teammates, so some kind of kooky little records like that that are kind of one-offs for a season. We have most consecutive seasons with 600 bats or more with Rose. Most home runs, third baseman in a season. Mike Schmidt, I think that's also been broken. Most assists by a shortstop, Ozzie Smith. And finally, the most at-bats in a season, Willie Wilson featured up top here. Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer. Tom Seaver with the Reds. Still looks funny to me. I want to see him in his Mets uniform. We got Raleigh Fingers. So Raleigh Fingers actually had a great year. He wasn't actually a Padre by this point. He actually got moved over to Milwaukee by this point. And he actually was the Cy Young Award winner in the American League. But not just that, he actually also was the MVP winner for the 1981 baseball season. So that's when relievers started really getting a lot of recognition for their work for the team. He's a guy, obviously, who pitched more than just one inning to get a lot of his saves during his heyday. So Raleigh Fingers. And then our other MVP was actually Jack Schmidt, was the other one that was kind of listed there. Our Rookie of the Years, I did mention already, we had Fernando Valenzuela, but we also had David Rigetti was the other one that was listed there. Lou Whitaker, I think another guy needs some strong consideration for the Hall of Fame personally. I think if Trammell gets in, Whitaker needs to be put in as well. We got Nolan Ryan. Probably a pretty popular card with this set. Like the old Astros hats there. Pretty recognizable card in the set. Ed Ott, as Mangini's pointed out, the shortest name in MLB history. We got Guidry, great pitcher during his time. Not really a Hall of Famer, though, when you really kind of add them all up, but a great pitcher during his time. Ozzie Smith still with the Padres. Ricky Henderson, his second-year card down here in the corner. I realized my book's a little off-center. Let me move it a little bit better so you can see it better. Greg Levinsky, big name at that time as a power hitter. Dwight Evans, kind of always on the periphery of Hall of Fame consideration during Veterans Committee times when he's up for reconsideration. King Griffey Jr.'s dad. The father of the New York Yankees manager, Bob Boone right there. Paul Maltor. Didn't have standalone All-Star cards. I don't think I pointed that out because they just added All-Star on top of the guys who actually appeared in the All-Star game for 1980. So this set definitely has a lot more color, I think, than the Fleer and Donner sets. I mean, it just kind of pops in a way that the other two sets don't. I think it was a few years before they really kind of caught up to Topps and actually were, in my mind, a product that you could really kind of say is comparable. Kirk Gibson, rookie card, not a Hall of Famer, but definitely a big card from the set just because of his, his legacy, I think, during the 80s. He was part of the 84 Tigers that won the World Series, and then how many times have we seen the replay of him hitting that home run with the Dodgers in 1988 during the World Series when he was running around on one leg? He definitely became kind of a legend because of that at bat specifically. So there he is in his rookie card with the Tigers. Leon Durham also had a little moment in the 80s, but not for a good one. It was for misplaying a ball for the Chicago Cubs during the playoffs in 1984. That was a pretty big gaffe, as it kind of allowed the Padres to rally and eventually win the series and go to the World Series and lose to the Tigers. Frank White, I think another guy may also need a little more Hall of Fame consideration. I think he and Whitaker definitely were the best second basemen, kind of like for a period of time for the American League. Some great teams. El Presidente down here in the corner. Denny Martinez. Great pitcher. Dave Winfield, still the Padres in this one. I think he may have moved over to the Yankees, I think maybe after the season. I could be wrong. I think by 82 he was already there. He might have been on the 81 Yankees team. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. We got Pop Stargell. The Pirates weren't so good in 81. Kind of finished near the bottom of the league in both halves as they were starting their decline, if you will, before they started reloading and getting good again right at the end of the 80s into the early part of the 90s. Phil Niekro, Hall of Fame pitcher, knuckleballer. Reggie Jackson. I believe this was his last season as a New York Yankee. You have your World Series cards here. You have the AL and NL champions kind of represented. Not a lengthy subset like they kind of were in some previous editions. In fact, the playoffs consist of all of just 4 cards. Where you have like the World Series. There's 2 World Series cards to commemorate not only that the Phillies won in 6 games, but it was their first ever World Series championship. You got Tug McGraw featured on the card there. Keith Hernandez, still with the Cardinals at this point. Also a guy that gets some consideration for the Hall of Fame whenever they look at the Veterans Committee. Not currently a Hall of Famer. Definitely a great first baseman during his era. He also would tell you that too. Dave Kingman, hell of a hitter. He would thrive in the current environment. He would be a guy that would be coveted. Low average, high strikeouts, but tons of home runs and RBIs. These guys were needed on teams back then, but they weren't necessarily valued in the same way that they are during the current baseball era. Sort of the three outcome players: home run, strikeout, or walk. Goose Gossage up here, Hall of Famer. Bill Russell also here, kind of definitely a solid third baseman in his era. Jose Cardinal still there. I love his hair. Always have. Love his cards. Jerry Koosman, the other guy on the Nolan Ryan rookie card. There is the Tim Raines rookie card right there, followed by Carlton Fisk. He actually has an update card in the update series where he's actually in a White Sox uniform, because this was the first year he played for the Chicago White Sox. In the Hall of Fame, he is a Red Sox. You know, he spent more seasons with the White Sox, but I think definitely his better seasons and sometimes his best memories for the baseball fandom came when he was in Boston. Sad to say it. I would like to see him wear a White Sox hat there. You got Dusty in the corner here. I think he'll eventually get in the Hall of Fame as a manager, especially now that he's won one. Got Eddie Murray, his third-year card right there. Jim Rice, Hall of Famer. Murphy's name also comes up whenever they do a Veterans Committee ballot when he's on there. Didn't make it again. Definitely a great player, though. Robin Yount, Hall of Famer. Now they're just coming super thick and frequent. Another name that comes up often for reconsideration for the Hall of Fame is Steve Garvey. Not currently a Hall of Famer. Mike Schmidt, as I mentioned before, the MVP. He actually drove in 91 runs that season, and that was with almost 7 weeks worth of games not being played. Just monster numbers for that season. Nick Swisher's dad, Steve Swisher. Jerry Remy, the longtime broadcaster for the Red Sox, who died a couple of years ago. Tommy John up there. He's actually going to be at the Chicago Sports Spectacular coming up here in Chicago, signing autographs. Burt Bryleven. Look at those caps, those Pittsburgh caps. Woo! There's something else. Great memories, even though I don't know if they really looked good then either, but great memories for sure. Joe Morgan, back with the Astros at this point, where he started his career. Jim Cott, now a Hall of Famer as well, with the Cardinals. He's got 3 cards with the Cardinals, 81, 2, and 3. Also going to be at the Chicago Sports Spectacular, as I mentioned in a previous video. This is actually the first card I ever had for this set. It's not this one. It was in terrible condition. I've later since replaced it, but it's the very first card I had where I kind of even learned about this design. Got Tony Perez down here, Hall of Famer. Gaylord Perry with the Yankees, which kind of makes me giggle. Like, I don't really remember him being with the Yankees, even though he played with a ton of different teams towards the last, 5 to 7 years of his career. He kind of bounced around a lot. Also a player from the early parts of the 60s that was still kind of active at this point. Bruce Sutter, who passed not too long ago. Hall of Famer right there. Johnny Bench, Hall Hall of Famer there, like Yastrzemski. This is third to last card with Topps. Even though they're both on a card for 84 Topps, just kind of commemorating them in particular. I think also Gaylord Perry was on there because they all retired the same season. Don Sutton at the top. Gaylord Perry, also someone that passed not too long ago. Dennis Eckersley, Hall of Fame reliever and starter. Amazing hair that he's kept all through his life. Bill Buckner again. Louis Tiant, I think great pitcher. Steve Carlton. This is I think the one of the Steve Carlton card that makes me giggle the most. Just because you can't even really see his face. All you see is just his hair popping out. Yeah, so it's maybe not his best, most flattering card. But it makes me giggle the most, I think, of all of his cards with Topps. Got Barry's father, Bobby. Got the Cobra, Dave Parker up there. I also agree with Mangini. They should probably be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. Bucky frickin' Dent. Pedro Guerrero had some good seasons during the 80s. Here we got Gary Carter up there, Hall of Fame catcher. Then we have a series of team cards. They also have the manager kind of featured up here in the corner as the manager featured manager card within the team card. Guys of note: Weaver up there, La Russa is featured on there, Sparky Anderson. A lot of Hall of Famers on that first page for sure. Got Billy Martin up there, not a Hall of Famer, but definitely well known. Same thing with Maury Wills. Got Don Zimmer, also lifetime baseball man, not a Hall of Famer. Bobby Cox. Tommy Lasorda. Dick Williams. Joe Torre with the Mets. Whitey Herzog, the Cardinals. Fun stuff. And for those of you who may or may not remember, Frank Howard, the power hitter from the 60s and 70s, was a manager also for a period of time. George Brett. Ted Simmons. Alan Trammell. And here's our final page. Got Pinella listed on there. So I think I definitely missed the Harold Baines. Forgot, somehow I didn't catch that one as we went through here, kind of showing you the Harold Baines rookie card. I can look that up real quick to go back to it. And I also missed the Fernando Valenzuela, probably because of the dual image on there. So I'll kind of go back and at least show you the Harold Baines before we wrap up. Hope you guys kind of enjoyed this one. Harold Baines, the controversial Hall of Fame selection, even though he's far from a controversial person. Definitely was very beloved baseball man, still is, but definitely as a controversial election candidate for the Hall of Fame. So I'll kind of end with that, showing you the Harold Baines. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Be back next month with another Hall of Fame set. I think it's going to be one a little bit more tied in with some Topps releases happening currently in March. All right, take care, everybody.